and I won't back down. Hey, baby, there ain't no easy way out.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us right here on The Right View. Tonight, we are joined by chef and restaurant owner, Andrew Gruel. Andrew, thanks for joining us. Look, I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine about my move to New York that I made, seems like 100 years ago. It was actually in 2007. And the reason I ultimately ended up moving to New York was to go to culinary school. And that whole story and the whole reason that that happened was kind of crazy. But tell me about you, and then maybe we'll get back into me. How did you get into cooking, and when did you know that you wanted to cook professionally? Because those are different things. You got a home cook, and then you got a professional cook, and they don't always they're not always one and the same.
So I grew up in New Jersey. I'm a Jersey boy, and that includes a lot of really good food, pizza, Italian food, whatever, all the cliches about New Jersey. But I grew up in a family that loved food, although both my parents worked full time, 7 a.m. until 11 p.m. every day. And my sister and I were not always, and I don't say this in a bad way, but we had to fend for ourselves a little bit. So I used to actually skip school some days and claim that I was sick. And all that was on TV, this was like 1990, 91, 92, were those in the middle of the day, besides the soap operas, which I got into a little bit, were the old school, like Jan Kan Cook, Jacques Pepin.
Yeah.
The PBS, I call them the dump and stir cooking shows. And I fell in love with it. I would mess up the whole kitchen and try and clean it up before my parents came home.
Oh,
and then
wow.
I would move to being sick the next day just so I could go back and try and make some of those spring rolls that Jan Kan Cook was making or whatever. So I got into it by virtue of that. That's when I was like, I love this chef thing, but I never thought it would become a career. Naturally working, you get a first job, you're 15. It was in restaurants, then hotels, and I kept ending up back in the kitchen professionally. I went to a small liberal arts college up in Maine and was working in restaurants and lobstering. And it was like 2 years into that process, besides the fact that at the small liberal arts college, they were trying to push me to protest capitalism 24/7.
Yeah.
I realized that maybe I should be looking into this cooking thing because I'm spending more time working in restaurants and I love that culture. And that's when I took the leap out and got into the more professional world of culinary arts, restaurant management, and then ultimately business and hospitality.
Wow. So is it safe to say you are rooting for the Eagles?
Oh, should we even get into that?
Oh, this is a lot. There's more here.
Well, it's funny. I'm a Giants fan. However, my best friend and attorney is a diehard Eagles fan. And here in Orange County, there's like Eagles bars throughout Orange County, which I didn't realize what a big deal it was. And by way of that culture, I've kind of become this proxy Eagles fan. So I'm not trying to be in everybody here. However, I can enjoy the Eagles.
Okay. Well, we'll take that. It's hard to tell where people stand, but I appreciate that. I got to be honest. I was hoping for the Bills, but that's okay. There's always next year, as they say. You and I actually, though, have something in common, and you just said it. The cooking shows on TV being the reason that you kind of leaned into becoming a chef. So what's funny is I graduated from college at a time when the job market wasn't great. I graduated in 2005, and I found myself doing a lot of odd jobs. And one of them was working in a restaurant, working as a bartender. AOC is not the only one who's done that, turns out. And as I'm working in these restaurants, I would go home at night. And for some reason, like the way I would just kind of like relax was I would put it on the Food Network and I would watch all these shows, these cooking shows. And I got really into actually baking. And it's so funny because it was the chef at the restaurant where I was working who ultimately one day said to me, have you ever thought of going to culinary school? And I was like, that's an interesting idea. And it's the reason that I ended up moving to New York and became, had the ability to go out one night, meet the guy who would ultimately be my husband. And that's the reason that I'm here today, Andrew. It's kind of like a wild story. But I love that you were influenced by sort of these TV chefs as well. And the days you're talking about, I mean, those were like the OGs. Those were the really, that's like almost throwing it back to Julia Child's type era. But we have that in common. Now, I went to culinary school and I officially have the title of a pastry chef. Now, I never ultimately made it into a restaurant. I never made it that far to do that job, but you did, and then you started a restaurant. That is next level for me. There's no way in my mind that I was ever going to go to culinary school, go out on the other side and start a restaurant, because it's one thing to actually make the food, but then you got to run the business on top of that. So how did that happen? Because that's a huge additional responsibility.
I knew right from the bat that I wanted to ultimately open my own restaurant and think
Wow.
bigger. After doing the culinary program and then getting in and apprenticing and working for all these chefs, and really, and you understand that, the kind of the culture of the restaurant, right? It's
Right.
its own world. I tell people it's like a
It
pirate.
is. If
You know,
you've never worked in a restaurant, you don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But if you have, everyone knows. And even if you've worked as a waiter, as a bartender, as a busboy, whatever it is, if you've been back, in the kitchen, everyone understands that. So go ahead.
Yeah, front of the house, back of the house, like
Yeah.
you're on one big pirate ship. And the cool thing about restaurants, I'll say too, to digress, is this, you have all these people in different parts of life that come together for one service. And that's
Right.
what's so cool about it is that frankly, sometimes it's just a group of the weirdest people ever. And we're all weird because to someone else that you're working with, you're weird, right? You might think
Right.
you're the normal one, but you all come together and then, you're either having drinks, you're getting to know these people. It's like camp. So
It
it was the
is.
coolest thing for me. But I knew I was like, I like this. I want to make it bigger because for me, and I'm sure you can agree, having worked in the restaurant industry, like there's also a lot of bad owners out there. There's some great owners, right? But then there's a lot of people who are mistreated, underpaid, and there's just like tips being, kind of pilfered. And I said, if I open my own restaurant, I want to do it the right way. Like I want to have a family, like a restaurant family and ultimately a real family. So after doing all of that and going back to business school in the restaurant world, I ultimately said, I want to open up my own restaurant, but then the economy crashed. That was in 2009, right? When the economy took
Right.
that major crash. I remember it was October 12th, 2009. I was running a couple restaurants in New Jersey and I was like, okay, I'm either going to go and open up my own place because I lost my job. They shut down. Or I'm going to go follow through on a passion project of mine. And that's how I ended up in California. I'd always been obsessed with kind of the ocean and marine stewardship and the role in which seafood had in the restaurant industry and food systems in general. And there was an opportunity at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. They were looking for a chef with a marketing. I do have a marketing degree too in food marketing, a chef with a marketing background who could teach other chefs about sustainable seafood to get them to eat more of the right types of seafood. It was a short-term program, a three-year grant. So I went out to California. I was like, I'll just do this as a side project. But after doing that for 3 years, I realized there were no restaurants out there serving high quality seafood at that cost and convenience of faster food. So I bootstrapped, borrowed some money from friends and family. And actually, I was like the first to start one of those gourmet food trucks in California.
Oh, wow.
And I started my original concept as a food truck. That was my foray. I was like, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I've been preaching about this for 3 years. And then that went from one food truck to ended up opening about 42 brick and mortar restaurants over 10 years.
That's amazing.
Internationally as well. We opened in Dubai. We had restaurants in 13 states here. And then in 2022, I sold that concept. So that was like, I just dove into it.
That's a lot. That's a lot to just dive into. And I'm curious. Yeah. And by the way, to have such great success doing it, that's not easy. So congratulations on really on all your success. I wonder how you think Donald Trump's no tax on tips will impact the restaurant industry.
Well, I think that's huge, right? And everybody always comes to me and says, why are you supporting the no tax on tips? What about the other industries? And I'm like, yeah, all of them, but we got to start somewhere. You know that servers, especially in the front of the house, and now that you can tip pool, right, it kind of goes a little bit into the back of the house if they're part of that service role, that those tips are essential. We don't make that much money to begin with. And it's the taxing on those tips that pulls so much money out of our pockets. I mean, we're not talking about high income earners here.
Right.
The people who are giving the tips, though, right? Like that's the piece to me that's important. I think there's something offensive about, I'm going to give you this tip and then you're going to go report it and get taxed on it. It's an experience, right? It's this personal experience of me tipping you. You might get 5%, you might get 50%. So to have the government put their hands in there, I think is kind of icky. I absolutely love the no tax on tips. I think it's going to put a ton of money in workers' pockets. It's going to help the economy. And then I think we can parlay that into other industries.
Yeah, and I remember getting, because you have to declare all the money you make in tips, right? I remember at the end of the night going in and declaring how much money I made, and then I would get a paycheck every 2 weeks, and the paycheck would be like $1.87 or something, because all of the money that you've made, it has been taxed and all that's been taken out. So I think it's going to be great. I love it. That it's just one more piece of what I think is going to help the country come back together and put more money in people's pockets, and obviously just be a positive thing overall. Speaking of positive things, Donald Trump, we just talked about him, went out to California with the First Lady to visit and hear about the recovery from these horrific wildfires that you guys have had out there. It's been awful to watch, I'll be honest. I think a lot of people around the country have felt very helpless because we've just watched as places that many of us who have visited California are familiar with just burn to the ground. I have friends who lost everything, who don't have a home, don't have a school for their kids, nothing. So I love that you have been helping supply food and all additional supplies to families who have dealt with the LA wildfires. Tell us about that. How's it been going? How's the recovery? I know you guys have had some rain, fortunately, although maybe that is causing other problems, but what a great thing to do.
We're still in phase 2 right now, right? Phase 1, I say, is where everybody's trying to figure out how they're just going to get by day to day because they've lost absolutely everything. And that's typically where the government is absent. In this phase 1 of any tragedy or disaster, the people need to step up in that phase 1 because it is rare that the government is going to have their, shit together in order to pull out do what they need to do. So we stepped in immediately. I was like, anybody who's leaving Los Angeles can come down, hang at the restaurant. We'll give you free food, free meals. We'll pull together a bunch of supplies. Wow. We thought this was going to be a small effort. The next day, we started having hundreds of people show up, and then we started getting truckloads of supplies. So we've got a restaurant right on Pacific Coast Highway. We've got 85 parking spots. We turned our parking lot into a donation drive. We've since ended up bringing roughly, I want to say probably $400,000 to $500,000 in supplies and meals up to various centers in Los Angeles. My wife's really been running this, for the past 3 weeks. Most of what we're doing now is working with the Dream Center in Los Angeles, which is an amazing organization that's been housing people and as well as giving them money in order to start to rebuild some of the homes, especially over in Altadena and Pasadena. So what we ended up doing was just becoming a hub because so many people wanted to help, but they didn't know what to do. Right. So we drove up into Los Angeles. We figured out, okay, we're gonna be able to drop at this center, this center, this center. We got in touch with firefighters. We got in touch with independent organizations. We did not work with any of those big nonprofits because we knew there were going to be hurdles there. And then we just really created that avenue of help and hope. And everyone stepped up. At one point, we had over 200 volunteers in our parking lot, breaking down boxes, loading trucks. We had a line of cars, roughly a quarter mile long to a half a mile, going from our restaurant down Pacific Coast Highway of people coming to drop goods off, which we were then separating and packaging into like 4 or 5 different box trucks that companies organized. And at one point, we ran out of trucks, and the city of Huntington Beach, which is an amazing city council, they brought the public works trucks over with the chief of police, took them offline, and had the public works workers load trucks and independently drive them up to Los Angeles to help people out. So it was pretty unbelievable in regards to that, coming together, especially in Orange County to Los Angeles.
For years, customers have been asking if MyPillow sells cross necklaces like the one Mike Lindell proudly wears every day. Well, guess what? You're in luck. They are excited to announce that Mike has partnered with a jeweler right here in the USA to create beautiful sterling silver My Crosses. You can save 30% today using promo code TRUMP at mypillow.com and click on the radio podcast square or call 800-624-3945 and be sure to use promo code TRUMP. You can choose from the women's or men's style and make sure you do it soon because this amazing offer won't last long. Just go to mypillow.com and click on the radio podcast square or call 800-624-3945 and use promo code TRUMP. Well, if people watching want to donate something, do you have like a website or something that people could go to?
I mean, we've just been doing this kind of like randomly at the last minute.
Which
So
I think that's the coolest part, Andrew. That's great. Amazing. Well, if you're out there in Huntington Beach, swing on by, drop
come
some
by the
stuff
restaurant.
off. Yeah.
Come by
I
the
will.
restaurant. You can drop stuff off, or you can buy a meal for somebody, because we're still sending meals up as well, hot meals that we're cooking out of our kitchen. We're at 16600 Pacific Coast Highway in Huntington Beach. That's 92649.
Pacific Coast Highway. Love it. That's amazing. Well, thank you for doing that. I know that, most of us never expect to find ourselves in a situation like that. But if you do, it's great to know there are people out there who care, who have your back, who are going to take care of you. I grew up in a place where we got a lot of hurricanes, and I vividly remember times where we literally had to go to like a Red Cross vehicle to get supplies that we needed because there was nothing. Nobody had anything. Everything was destroyed. So thanks for doing that. It's really, really great. And we're obviously wishing all the best to everybody out there in California. I want to ask you about being a regular on Fox News, because all of a sudden your face is popping up there all the time, especially on Gutfeld. I mean, how did that happen? And have you been worried at all about your food or your restaurants being canceled? Because that's a big step to just show up there on Fox News, Andrew, especially when you're in California.
Yeah, I know. I would say I was officially canceled in like 2020, 2021. So I spoke out. It's funny. I used to do food. So I did Food Network for years, right? Hosted shows, judging shows, Chop Junior, all that. We had our own food truck show. And then I moved over to FYI and then went back to Food Network. I was in that TV space, and I kind of kept my politics to myself. There was really no need. And then I slowly opened my mouth, but it was when the pandemic hit, it was just too much for me. And I spoke out publicly, and went on a big tirade against Newsom. And then it got picked up by everything. It was like celebrity chef, Food Network chef calls Newsom an a-hole, because that was what I did. And immediately I was on like every news channel to talk politics, policy, restaurant business, etc. Well, those on certain networks clearly didn't want me on because of my viewpoints. And I just ended up, it was like Fox every night, Fox. And then somehow I kept ending up on all those shows, and that parlayed into a lot more media in different outlets. And I guess somehow it's been 4 or 5 years now, I've become more of a regular on Fox. Now, when that happened in 2020, yeah, we got canceled. I mean, I had people showing up at my house, my businesses. I've got 4 kids. Like, it was crazy. Death threats, you name it. Furthermore, the state came after me. I got served a labor investigation like 4 days after speaking out about Newsom. Anytime I would go on the Ingram Angle or any of those big shows, the health department would show up. So they tried canceling me. But I'll tell you what, when you stand up even stronger, people will come support you. Our business went up 100%. Wow. I had people driving an hour just to come and eat at my restaurants because they supported what I was saying. The people who complain and cancel and do all of that, they're not going to restaurants anyways, right? Like, they're sitting in their basement eating Domino's and sucking back Red Dye 4. These are not the people that come to your business. So
yeah,
have at it.
By the way, I love to hear that it actually ended up being a good thing for you, because I feel like there are so many people who are scared to voice their opinion. And I honestly, less so now. I think we're maybe in a new era. I call it the golden age of America, but some have called it that as well. I just feel like it's a different time. People are more apt to talk about the fact that they have conservative values or whatever it is, but love to hear that everything ended up being ultimately okay for you. I mean, obviously you had it was a rocky time with some of the stuff, but that's really, really great. So good on you for doing it, and keep doing it. And you're continuing probably to inspire other people to do that as well. Something I want to talk to you about before we let you go is big food. I'm all about, health, fitness. I love to, stay healthy and do things that I think are good for me and my family. I heard you are really focused on big food and rising obesity rates, as well as generally the health issues that we're facing in this country. So tell us more about that, because this is something I think that actually a lot of people came out and voted for in the past election. And one of the reasons was because Donald Trump had the support of RFK Jr. And people were like, listen, this guy's talking about things that we all want to know about. You just mentioned Red Dye 4. We want to get this stuff out of our food. Tell me about what we need to know.
I've been talking about this now for well over a decade. As I mentioned, I did that program, that nonprofit program where we focused on not just seafood, but eating better food and healthy food systems, right? Because it's all integrated. It's kind of the biodynamic nature of like food production through the supply chain and then all the way down to the soil and how our food is being produced. And a lot of our food is junk. It's lost nutrition over the years. It's not as healthy. It's not healthy for the soil. It's not healthy for local economies. We're seeing the government subsidize junk food into a lot of these low-income communities, and then that results in all these chronic diseases, diabetes, hypertension, you name it, right? And there's certainly multiple elements to it. It comes back to the products and the ingredients themselves, the cheapening of our food. It comes down to what the public health agencies are telling people is good to eat. And then we find out that a lot of that information is being funded by these big food manufacturers, some of the massive food manufacturers that really control the entire food system, which in essence pushes out a lot of the small and medium-sized farmers, independents, and little guys. They do that by virtue of regulation. You know, people say you want to deregulate because you want all these corporations to run everything. Not the case. Most of the big companies actually like the regulations because it pushes out the little guys. And as I've been buying food for restaurants as well as my family, I've got 4 kids. Over the years, we've noticed how bad it's gotten. So we've really put a focus on making sure that we serve the right foods, we educate the people properly so they know what they're eating. And then furthermore, we cook more and teach people how to cook more at home, because a lot of this comes down to just getting rid of the artificial stuff. Now, I'm by no means saying ban this or ban that or don't eat these. I mean, you're always going to have that indulgent meal. We know that. Like, look, I love Doritos too. You know, it's just about if we can start to offset some of that junk with cooking at home, real foods, simple foods, and understanding the food system, where our food comes from and then where it goes. I think that that's going to open up people's eyes to a lot of the reasons why we've seen this increase in chronic disease over the past 20 or 30 years. That's kind of my perspective on it. And the bigger the government's gotten, interestingly, the sicker we've gotten. I mean, if you correlate those chronic diseases across a 20 or 30 year lifespan, you'll see that the FDA and the USDA has also gotten larger. And then you bring in the element of like vaccines and big pharma and all that. And, you know, I'm not an expert to speak specifically in that world, although you can draw conclusions simply from the outside. So for me, it's about eating the right types of foods, promoting the right types of foods, small, local, domestic farmers and producers, fishermen, because you talk about seafood, we import 80+% of the seafood we consume in the US, and yet we've got the most plentiful fisheries of any country in the world. So it's all about where our food comes from. And then that's ultimately why I wrote my cookbook, which is really simple, which is just a family cookbook. It's Chef Gruel's Family Cookbook, which is about getting in the kitchen, keeping it simple, keeping it clean, no seed oils, none of those artificial ingredients, and just cook more.
No seed oils. We know that RFK Jr. is on board with that. There's the famous meme of them having McDonald's on the plane. And it's like my father-in-law, I think my brother-in-law, Don, a couple other people, and then RFK's there, and they zoom in on his face, and he's just like, seed oils, no. But I love that you talk about educating people, because that really is a big problem. And I think there's such a vacuum in that space. No one talks about what we really need to know in terms of what we're eating. If you go back like 30 years, I think about when I was a kid and people were talking about margarine. Margarine was the best thing you could have. Everybody, it's got less fat in it. You know, you want to use this for cooking. And then you find out the margarine is actually, Andrew, probably the worst thing you could possibly put in your body. It's far better to just use butter to cook all of your food than it is to use margarine, because margarine is just hydrogenated oils, right? And it's just the idea that we have allowed these things to happen and that people just have no idea that people are still buying it off the shelf. I don't have a drop of margarine in my entire house. I just have real butter, and it's hard to find it, because if you want the butter that's easier for my kids to scoop out, you know, with a knife, you have to really search for it because they all have the oil infused in it. But it's those kind of things, right, that we need to start teaching people about, at least talking about a little bit, so that people have an opportunity to make better and more informed choices, at least when they're going to the grocery store to buy food for their families.
Yeah, and if you think about it, someone might say, oh, well, that's just one ingredient. Well, not necessarily. You know, I grew up in a margarine family, too. I remember in the 80s and 90s, it was like country crock margarine. We did
100%.
like our butter.
I can't believe it's not butter.
Yeah, exactly. Our butter
Yeah.
sat in the corner of the fridge and came out maybe on like Christmas, and now you look at it. So it's in everything. Like that's the point is that when you're consuming it, you think, oh, a little bit here, a little bit there. It's in everything. High in omega-6 is bad for our body. And then we end up with this imbalance of omega-6 to omega-3. And that's what leads to all these illnesses, and hyper, kind of inflammation in our bodies, et cetera. So I think that's a really good point that you make. And we just need to learn more. And the funny thing about margarine, I love that you brought that up, is that was promoted as like this miracle product.
Right.
For years. And it was the American Heart Association that was promoting it. The people making the margarine were connected to the AHA, and all that money was flowing back and forth through all the food marketing agencies. And it's just this big incestual group of like bad information. And that's what we need to get away from.
Yeah, the food pyramid once upon a time, or I don't even know who funds the food pyramid these days, but I think one of the initial ones was funded by like the cereal companies. And when you look at the top, where you have the most, it's like grains, cereals, and you're like, oh, well, this is what I should be eating the most of. Turns out like that's all trash, Andrew. It's all just a lie. But I feel like we're on the precipice of having all of this information readily available for people. The fact that you pointed it out, we're the biggest country in the most wealthy country on earth, and yet our people are continuing to get sicker and die earlier. There's something wrong there. There's some inverse thing going on that we shouldn't see happening in the United States. So I think we're going to see it happen over the next 4 years, that a lot of this stuff is going to be exposed. Last thing, speaking of doing things that are good for you and that, let's face it, tastes good. We like that too. You have a new cookbook out, Andrew Gruel's Family Cookbook. Tell me about it, and what is your favorite recipe in the book that you can tell us about?
Well, dovetailing off what we were just talking about, we said, let's get people in the kitchen, especially with their family, because it goes beyond the food and the health, but also just being in the kitchen as a family. I mean, I'm sure you know this. Anytime people come together and get together, where do they always end up? In the kitchen.
In the kitchen, yeah, always.
And it's that needs to be something that happens every single day. We're living a very fast-paced life, and it's easy sometimes just to order out Uber Eats, DoorDash, whatever it is. My wife and I both run the businesses and the restaurants, so we're busy. We got the kids in our lives day in and day out in the restaurants, but we still take that time to be able to get in the kitchen, if not for a quick 30-minute meal. And that's kind of where things slow down, and we can talk about just life, values, right? Establishing that North Star and that moral compass that I think is missing in a lot of communities and families. Nowadays, it all comes back to food. Food is the great unifier. So that's really the genesis of this book, and understanding that we don't need to create these overly intellectualized recipes. We can just put together some real simple combinations to get people into the kitchen. We've got 50 recipes, full color cookbook. My kids tested all of them. My wife took all the photos, so we know that they work. We did it in partnership with Brave Books, which is an absolutely amazing company. I think that's kind of redefining values in the kids' book world. Our kids were actually subscribers for years before this relationship started with me. And it's a really fun cookbook. But even if you don't have kids, it's a great cookbook, because this is just a kind of a 101. Like, we give a basic pantry. In terms of my favorite recipe in that cookbook, gosh, that's a tough one. Maybe the dark chocolate raspberry panini, or the crunchy granola pancakes. I also love let me see, I did almost a play on like a Monte Cristo, which is like a French toast sandwich with green apples and cheddar and turkey. So real fun combos, nothing over the top, great cookbook.
I love it. And where can people find it?
It's at www.andrewcookbook.com.
Okay, andrewcookbook.com. Well, Andrew, thanks for spending a little time with us. Thanks for making our lives tastier and hopefully healthier as well in the future. More of that to come. Like I said, I feel very good about where we're heading, and that it feels like people are open right now to really leaning into this space in terms of figuring out what's in our food supply, learning what's actually healthful for you to be eating, for you to be feeding your families, and you play a big role in that. So thanks for joining us here today. To everybody at home, as always, make sure you like, subscribe, share, and follow, and we'll see you back here next time for more of The Right View.
And I won't back down. Hey, baby, there ain't no easy way out.
Nothing nothing is worse than being on a phone call that drops. Nothing is worse than trying to text someone and you can't reach them because your phone is out of service range. And nothing is worse than supporting these major corporations and companies who don't support us. That is why I love Patriot Mobile. They are America's only Christian conservative wireless network. They use every cell tower out there available to all networks so that they have the greatest 4G and 5G coverage nationwide. And they support the causes that are important to us as conservatives. If you go today to patriotmobile.com/Lara Trump and use the promo code Trump, you will get free activation today. Again, that is patriotmobile.com/Lara Trump. The promo code is Trump for free activation so that you can get a great cell plan and feel good about doing it.